This past New Year's was mine and my boyfriend's 4-year anniversary. We typically don't do much, so this year we decided to make it special by planning a romantic getaway. At the time, the two of us were living in Seattle and wanted to rent a cabin in a snowy, small town for the weekend. We found a cabin on Airbnb with a hot tub and we were sold. The cabin was, of course, the last house on the road. To get to it, you had to drive down a small, removed, private road that ended in a roundabout. Off the roundabout was a long uphill driveway leading up to the cabin. We got to the cabin and it was snowy and beautiful. The cabin itself sat on top of a garage and you needed to take stairs on the backside of the property to get to the front door. When we got inside, there was a booklet with all of the cabin's info outlined. The book said that during the snowy season, don't be surprised if their contracted snowplowers showed up to clear off the driveway. Okay, sounds good. We unpacked and realized that there was no service on either of our phones, but the booklet told us that there was a landline in the cabin if we needed anything. We spent the first night by the fire playing board games and drinking wine. The weekend was exactly what we needed. We planned to spend the next day in town, and that night, I had booked us a reservation for a nice dinner. We were gone almost all day, only returning briefly to get dressed up to enjoy some good food. Dinner was great and we were excited to head back to the cabin for some champagne hot tubbing. While at dinner, the temperature had dropped and it snowed for the first time that day, coating everything in a fresh layer of powder. We drove down the private road and got to the driveway. At that point, my boyfriend stopped the car, headlights shining in front, and asked if I noticed the new tire tracks. I looked at the driveway, hoping to quickly disregard the new tire tracks, but they were there. Immediately, we remembered that these snowplowers could have stopped by. But the issue was that we saw the tire tracks because of the snow and who plows in the dark. We also knew that once we were at the cabin, that we had no service on our cell phones. So we figured that we would head back into town and message our Airbnb host and ask them if one of their friends had stopped by the apartments. We waited for a while in town for a reply from our host but didn't hear back. We could have called, but at that point it was past 10 and we didn't want to be bad guys. We figured that we blew the whole thing out of proportion and that we might as well head back to the cabin. After all, I am a big true crime fan, and I like spooky subreddits and horror movies, so I was probably just psyching myself out. My boyfriend drove us back, and this time, we actually drove up the driveway. Towards the top of the hill, the part of the driveway, I noticed something. My stomach dropped as I noticed footprints on the property. We backed down the driveway and took a closer look to see if there were more footprints. From what it looked like, someone had driven up the driveway, reversed down, parked, and then got out of the car and walked onto the property. Since we had now also driven on the tracks that we couldn't find where the footprints ended. The property was quite large with tons of trees and brush, and we knew that these footprints could go anywhere. The moment that we saw footprints, we decided to call the police. We figured that it was better safe than sorry. We would just have the officer go onto the property with us to check everything out. We drove back down the road until we were able to get service, called the police and waited for their arrival. A policeman showed up and we followed him onto the property. The officer scanned the property and determined that no one was out there. Obviously, we're a little shaken up and a lot embarrassed, and we thanked the officer as he left. Needless to say, neither of us wanted to sit in the hot tub in the dark woods after what had happened. Instead, we locked the doors up and watched a movie champagne-less. We were both tired from the day and we passed out pretty quickly. At 3 a.m., we both woke up on the couch with the TV on and all the lights, laughing about how the night didn't turn out as planned. As my boyfriend went to brush his teeth, we heard a noise. It sounded mechanical and it only lasted a few seconds. We looked at each other and froze. The garage door. There are very few reasons that someone would need to open the garage door of a guest-occupied Airbnb at 3 in the morning. Like I said, we woke up to all the lights on and the cabin had lots of windows. We knew that if someone was outside, they knew we were here and they could see us. I immediately grabbed the landline and I dialed 911. We sat crouched in the Airbnb, praying for the police to arrive. We knew that whoever had made those tracks were still on the property, and this time they were making noise. As I sat talking to the operator, we heard a bang in our balcony as if someone threw something up onto it. I was losing my mind when the operator told me that the police were nearby. All of a sudden, they were there. We saw the police lights and watched them search the property. Soon, we heard a banging on the door and it was the police and we were okay. At the door were 2 policemen, one in front of us and one a little behind, kind of kicking around snow and looking at the ground. I immediately noticed that the police officer in the back as the officer that did the initial check on the property. The police officer told us that not only was the garage door shut, but it was locked. And again, there were no signs of anyone on the property. We discussed leaving, but the police officer said the road conditions were too dangerous that time of night. I looked at the police officer who had come out to the property twice, and I felt that I had deeply disappointed him. My boyfriend and I went back inside, again locking all the doors and trying to fall asleep. The next day we were leaving, and while we survived the night, I didn't feel right in the cabin anymore. It was forever the spooky cabin in my head, and I wanted to leave. As we packed up, we heard the same noise that we had heard at 3 a.m. Oh, it was the heater. A heater that sounds just like a garage that sounds lasts the same duration. My boyfriend looked at me and immediately said, "You need to give up your murder shows," and walked away. As if. As for the banging on the balcony, it was just the perfectly timed fall of a pine cone. I promise I'm not paranoid. I think back in this story a lot and I'm embarrassed about how little came of it, but I'm also incredibly grateful for the same reason. But whoever drove onto the property and walked around, thank you for triggering all of my nightmares. It happened during summer vacation when I was 11. Me and my parents always go to South India for at least 1 month to see the family. And during the entire month of June, there is what we call in our little village the Mango Festival. It's a religious festival where divinity statues are exhibited in parades. There is also a large alley filled all along with small temporary stands where people can buy lots of different stuff like street food, fruits, toys, clothing, and more at very cheap prices. My mom and I always go to these little stores in the evening at like 5 or 6 when it's already dark, because going during the daytime is too exhausting, with the unbearable heat plus the crowd. At that time, the alley is still very bright, enlightened by the stores and the decorative lighting. That day, my mom decided to stop at a shoe flip-flop stand to buy me some pairs. The seller proceeded to show my mom the collections, and when he noticed my presence, he had locked his eyes on me. At the beginning, it did not bother me that much. I just thought that it might look like somebody that he knew, but he just kept staring at me the whole time. He knew exactly the time to stare at me. When my mom was looking at my direction, he stopped, and then he would stare back again when she looked away. It was obvious at that point, and it made me feel very uncomfortable. Eventually, we had to leave without buying anything, but the seller insisted that we should come tomorrow because he had a new shipment or whatever new collections were arriving. 2 days after, my mom called me to go to the festival stands, but I was reluctant to go with her this time. I told her that I was tired and that I didn't want to. but she yelled at me saying that I'm always lazy and wasting my summer vacation by staying at home all day. So I went with her. Our first stop was at the cheap jewelry store, and then my mom made me do something that I always hated. But she did that all the time in order to help me with my shyness. She said, "Take my purse and go to the shoe stand by yourself and buy a pair that you like. I'll be watching you from here." I refused at first, but she progressively raised her voice, and to avoid being humiliated in front of the other kids, I did what she said. When he saw me approaching his stand, he welcomed me with his unsettling smile. He proceeded to show all the new sandals, and I was his only customer. He even took the time to put the sandals on me one by one, asking if it fit well. At this point, I just took whatever freaking shoe quickly to get out of there. And now, it was the time for the checkout. I was and still am stressed to order or to talk to a vendor. I used to stutter a lot during these social situations, but this time it was different. It wasn't only stress, but there was also this fear and this gut feeling, saying that this man was strange and that I shouldn't be here with him alone. I handed him the money and was waiting for my change, but his demeanor suddenly changed. He became fidgety and showed frustration over the cash register. He then said that the cash register had broke for some unknown reason and that it wouldn't open. I glanced outside to see if my mom was still watching me, and she was still observing. When we had made eye contact, she made a gesture with her hand, telling me to hurry. She was observing at an angle, and as I was next to the cash register at the corner, I couldn't see her properly anymore. At the same time, the seller told me that he had another register in the trailer. He then took my money and went to his trailer. It was a sort of open shop, so you could see his trailer if you were right in front of the shop. He went inside of it for a long time, and I could hear voices of another person inside. They were talking, but I could not tell what they were getting on about. So for like 10 minutes, I was just standing there waiting patiently, and peeking back at my mom occasionally to notice her of my presence at the checkout. And then another client entered the shop and was looking at the merchandise. She asked me where the vendor was, and I told her that he was in the trailer. At the sound of our conversation, the vendor peeked out from the trailer window and said to the woman, "We don't take any more clients, ma'am. We're closing soon." The woman left soon after. It seemed strange that he had decided to close so suddenly and so early. It was only 6 p.m., and usually the shops would close later at 8 or even 9. I couldn't leave, and I was waiting to get my change back, when the vendor peeked from the trailer's window and said that he finally managed to get my change. And then he made a sign with his hand, as if to say to get inside. I was unsure about what he had wanted, so I said nothing, and I waited there, awkwardly. After a short moment, he peeked back and said, "You can come now." I was confused. Why couldn't he just come outside and give me my change back? And why the heck did he take so much time? I didn't say anything. Instead, I peeked back outside to see my mom. When she saw my concerned face, she finally decided to come and help me. I said to the seller, "Actually, I'm waiting for my mom." When my mom entered the shop, the seller got out of his trailer almost immediately and handed my change back. He was not frustrated anymore, but smiling and very talkative. He even asked my mom if we were from here, and to which she responded that we were from France and that we were spending the summer vacation in our hometown. My mom and I went to some other shops, but I could still see other clients coming to the shoe shop, even though he said he was closing soon. By the time my mom had finished up her shopping, it was 8 p.m., and on our way back I could still see the lights from his shop, and when we got closer, I could even see that he was using the same cash register that was supposed to be broken. At that age, I didn't realize how creepy this whole thing was. It just seemed odd and awkward. Years later, I finally realized that his gaze, his behavior, and his touches were all so wrong. And that night, I bet his intentions were even worse. Luckily, that night was the last time that I ever saw him. During the festival of the following year, I couldn't find a stand anymore. The slot was occupied by a street food stand. As a man in my 20s, I thought that I should share the 3 times that I was almost kidnapped while growing up. The first story happened when I was 4 or 5, and this happens to be one of my earliest memories. So one summer, my grandparents would invite my immediate family to go camping with them. They have an RV which was just big enough to cram all of us in. So we RV'd camped at a place called Goose Pond in northern Alabama. During this trip, my grandpa taught me how to ride a bike without training wheels. After many tries and falls, I was actually able to ride my bike pretty well. So, out of excitement, I asked my parents if my brother, who was a few years older than me, and I could go out to ride our bikes. They said that we could ride this short loop where about 60% of the loop can be seen from the RV. So my brother and I grabbed our bikes and we took off. While riding around the loop, nothing eventful ever happened until we had reached the final turn. This turn was barely out of view from my parents' end of the RV. So when my brother and I turned the loop, a car pulled up behind us. So we got off of our bikes and stepped off the road to let the car pass. When the car got parallel to us, it stopped. A man from the car rolled down his window and started talking to us. He said something along the lines of, "Hey, I have candy in my car if you want some. Just come over here and I'll give you a piece." Ignorant young me took a step in the man's direction, but as soon as I took that step, my brother grabbed my shoulder and said, "Let's go back to the RV." As soon as we had pedaled away, the man drove off. This second story happened when I was 10. For some background information, in my small hometown, the Civic Center basically shares a parking lot with the baseball fields. So my family was at the Civic Center to watch my little sister graduate from preschool. The graduation was around 5 p.m., and I had a baseball game at the fields next door at 7 p.m. So after the graduation, I asked my parents if I could walk across the parking lot to find my team while they cleaned up, and they gave me their blessing. As soon as I had walked out of the front door and turned to head to the baseball fields, I saw 2 men loitering in the parking lot. They saw that I was alone and they asked me to come over to them. Me being oblivious to the danger that I was in, said that I needed to get to my game that was going to start soon. They asked if I played baseball, and why my parents would let someone like me walk all by myself. They offered to walk with me, and I replied, "Oh, no thanks, I'm just going to the baseball fields." When they noticed that I wasn't cooperating, as they had originally hoped, one of the men lunged in my direction and grabbed me. Luckily, I was far enough away that he didn't get to me, and I took off. I don't think I've ever run faster in my life before this. Luckily, the men didn't run after me and I found my team moments later. When my parents got to the field, they were panicking to find me. Apparently someone had reported those 2 men hanging out in the parking lot in the Civic Center, and my parents were scared to death that they got me. My last story happened when I was 14. Again, as some background information, my house is located next to a major highway, with several gas stations and convenience stores within walking distance of it. My hometown is one of the safest towns in the state. Close to this incident, my town was ranked in the top 25 safest towns in the state. Because of this, my parents didn't mind if I walked to the store to grab snacks, as long as I had asked their permission first. So one day, I was walking to the store. Nothing happened on the way down there, so I walked into the store to buy some snacks. On the way back, I noticed a truck driving by me. When he passed, I looked up and saw the man driving was staring right at me. He wasn't paying attention to the road, just me, so he passed me, and I saw him turn around at the entrance of the neighborhood by my house and started heading back in my direction. At this time, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I see people turning around there all the time. When he drove by me the second time, he was going noticeably slower than the first time and he was staring me down. When he got parallel to me, he stopped and opened his door to try to grab me. God must have been looking out to me because as soon as he did this, a car had pulled up behind him and forced him to continue on down the road. As he drove away, I watched him and saw him turn around again and start heading in my direction. At this point, I was panicking. I took off behind my neighbor's house and hopped the fence into my backyard and went into my house. I remembered that I was home alone and the terror started to sink in. I immediately rushed to the window to see the man carefully scanning the area where he last saw me. He was looking for me. He stayed in his car, going so slow that it took him what seemed like 5 minutes to pass my house. When he started to pass my house, I noticed that he was trying to see through my windows from the road. I ducked down and hid, only looking through the bottom corner of the window. Eventually, I saw him speed off, never to return again. As a boy growing up, people never thought these types of things could happen to me. It is a mystery to me how I was able to avoid kidnappers 3 times. Most people aren't that lucky. To all the young people and parents that are listening to this, it doesn't matter who it is, boy or girl. Bad people are lurking everywhere.